Astra Abyssosk. Welcome to the Adventurers Guild.
Ad Astra Abyssosk. Welcome to Nod-Krai, Dominion of the Fatui.
I cannot believe we're less than a week away from Nod-Krai. That's crazy. Here we are. And there's so much to talk about, but for this video I want to talk about Sandrone the Marionette, who's going to be the main Fatui harbinger and villain of Nod-Krai, at least it appears that way. And they recently showed us a lot about her that kind of debunks a lot of what we thought and confirms a lot of what we thought. Because I'll admit, I'm surprised that she could walk on her own and kind of functions without the big robot. But I'm still very curious of their relationship and who the big guy actually is. They also casually dropped that Columbina might be the lost, prophesized moon goddess. This could be a red herring, but that sort of checks out with all the statues of the Seven we see with Columbina on it. One thing we can kind of confirm right away that's been speculated for years now is that the Katherine that we see in every Adventurers Guild is actually a Sandrone puppet. And in 5.8, the Archon Prelude quest, the Fatui operatives that were in Natlan under Sandrone's orders were all automatons as well. Plus, both Sandrone and Katherine have a similar aesthetic, and both having a design that resemble Fontainians quite a bit. The reason this always made sense to me is because what a great way to gather intel on every single nation simultaneously. A lot of what happens in each nation goes through the Adventurers Guild. So having an automaton or puppet stand-in for the Adventurers Guild, aka Katherine, made sense. Now I want to talk about the potential plotline and storyline for Sandrone and Nod-Krai, but first, let's talk about who she could potentially be. Their origins, because I do think they're actually from Fontaine. That makes the most sense. Both Fontaine and Nod-Krai are the most industrial places in all of Teyvat. Besides the Doctor, Sandrone's probably the most research-oriented Fatui harbinger, being a superclass engineer and mechanic. Mentioned from every other Fatui's voice lines to always be engrossed in her research, and very rarely likes to come out into the open. Also described to have a terrible personality. But considering both Sandrone and the big automaton we know for sure now are both androids, it makes sense for her to have a very bland, cold personality. Tartaglia even stating that she looks like she wants to murder him all the time, but considering Tartaglia is pretty rambunctious and destructive, her caring about her work, her research, and her creations, that kind of makes sense too. I also love how they portray her in this trailer of being very sassy, confident, and already assuring victory, calling Nod-Krai the Dominion of the Fatui. The captain told us in Natlan that all Fatui harbingers are allowed to prioritize their own ambitions over the Tsaritsa, which means you get a very mixed bag of Fatui harbingers and their loyalties. I would say the Doctor and Sandrone are probably the most loyal to the legitimate Fatui cause. At least it appears that way. In the story quest with Jank, who abducted Curve from the Steambird, he mentions working for an unnamed Fatui harbinger, and he had his tongue cut out at the end of the quest, because Sandrone did not want to draw too much attention, and this quest drew the attention of the Traveler, obviously. So her very cynical, terrible personality, along with everything they keep showing us about Sandrone, makes me believe that the most speculated origin of the two actually checks out. Especially since there's a good chance that Sandrone, if playable, might actually be an animo element. We know the playable element of animo usually comes with a tragic backstory. That's just par for the course now, which certainly does not escape the LA allegations, being that Sandrone originates from the Nars and Croins, an ancient organization in Fontaine, a very secret research institution that studied the Abyss, and played a big part during the Cataclysm. LA was renowned for his kinetic research and engineering, noted to be a very rigid and serious person who only seemed to care about his research. He was known as a child prodigy and became a researcher at the Institute of Natural Philosophy. And because we know this was an organization of orphans, he had a younger orphan sister, Marianne, who looks exactly like Sandrone, to the letter. We also know that Jacob was also part of this organization and one of the kids here, and we learned in Fontaine what he turned out like. He was kind of a jerk, becoming a neo-human inheriting abyssal powers. But here's where it gets interesting, because Marianne, although looks like Sandrone, she was also in one of the world quests in Fontaine. She was fatally injured during the battle with Ilia, the dragon you can see at the bottom of the lake in Fontaine, and her consciousness was absorbed by an Oceanid, causing them to merge into a hybrid Oceanid, Marianne. And again, we met her already, so this always debunked the Marianne being Sandrone allegations, but it actually doesn't. If I'm being honest, this actually proves more that it might actually be true, and here's why. Sandrone's codename is the Marionette, and her symbol is a puppet on strings. The Marionette was a very specific French doll based off the Virgin Mary, and Sandrone even resembles the Virgin Mary. The whole point of it though being a doll that's not real but can seem real. You all know that I've speculated for a long time now that the big automaton has been controlling the Marionette, much like a ventriloquist controls his dolls. Makes it seem like there's two people talking up there, but it's one person controlling a puppet. The Marionette is also based off French origin, and Fontaine is based on France. At least that's one of the biggest inspirations, obviously, but like we already discussed, Alain was a master engineer and prodigy, but even at a young age was known as cold and rigid. If the real Marianne died during the Cataclysm and merged with an Oceanid, clearly Alain might have recreated his sister to be Sandrone. I mean, you can even see the crank in her back, this also being a common item found in Fontaine as well. To prolong his life, Alain might have uploaded his consciousness into this big automaton. Would definitely be within his capabilities, and it would make sense to have a Fatui Harbinger from Fontaine, the nation of automatons, for that Harbinger to be represented by an automaton. Because those kids had such close contact with the Abyss, and were alive during the Cataclysm, they probably have goals that align with the Fatui. After he uploaded his consciousness into this automaton, he probably recreated his sister in android form. But it's not his real sister, it's just a replica, it's a marionette of his sister, not the real person. He might not even be aware that her consciousness merged with an Oceanid and can still be found in Fontaine. Plus, Alain would have lost his humanity uploading himself into a robot, hence having a replica of his sister at all times. And because she's being controlled and mimicked by a giant robot with no personality, and Alain was already described in human form to be very bland and rigid and cold and calculated, that's why Sandrone is so cynical and murderous, with a horrible personality obsessed with research. He recreated his sister to basically be the face of Sandrone, while the big guy, Alain, is the brains behind everything. He's the one doing everything. They literally describe this kid, Alain, to only care about his research. That's exactly how the Fatui Harbingers describe Sandrone. Thing I did not expect, though, is how intricate Sandrone would be. He obviously recreated his sister to be able to walk and talk and do things on her own. Because something I noticed even in the first Nod-Krai trailer, every time Sandrone would react or laugh or something, the big robot kind of reacted too. Again, kind of like a ventriloquist, controlling it, but she seems to be very independent. But that doesn't mean she's still not just a marionette at the end of the day. The literal spokesperson, while the big guy does all the heavy lifting and he's the brains behind it. So in a nutshell, before Nod-Krai actually drops, that's my theory on the origins of Sandrone and what's going on between the puppet and the automaton. I could be wrong on this, but that's just my last speculation before Nod-Krai drops. As for what's going to happen in 6.0, I thought it was very interesting that she greeted us in Nod-Krai. Based off of what Sandrone already said about us back in Fontaine, she probably does not want us to get involved with the Fatui affairs. We are a potential problem here. She is spearheading this entire operation in Nod-Krai, while Ildadore no doubt will make an appearance, for multiple reasons. Because Malvika already said his research headquarters are here, but Scaramouche is also in Nod-Krai for a reason of his own, which I want to talk about in its own video, because that is crazy. But Lauma said herself, the Frostmoon Scions are going to draw a line of blood in the snow, and that the Frostmoon Scions, the descendants of Hyperborea, refuse to give up the moon and the fragments. Seems the Fatui Harbingers already have a good chunk of the moon fragments themselves. They probably have a big old piece and built an entire research lab on top of it. You know, it's like that first Transformers movie where they built that massive dam over the cube. But clearly they want more. The moons being a big key to Teyvat, because the Moon Sisters were created, or at least around during the time of Nibelung. That's why Sandrone sent operatives to Natlan to do research. That is the significance of the moon and their ties to the dragons, which begs the question about Columbina, because they hint towards her being this moon goddess, this prophesized moon goddess, but something just isn't quite right about it. Probably because the frost moon's the only moon not destroyed and killed, but it's been dormant. And again, this leaves us so much more questions. Why does Columbina have Statue of the Sevens in Nod-Krai? And is she just an avatar of the moon, but it's dormant? That's the whole point.
It is a story not only of the Frost Moon scions, but also of the moons themselves. We Frost Moon scions are the last descendants of the ancient golden realm of Hyperborea. It is also said that when the moons shattered, most of their fragments rained down upon this land like stardust. Yet, successive generations of Frost Moon scions have always passed down a prophecy that one day the moon goddess would return. That prophecy did indeed come to pass, though not quite.
I still wish to return to the moon that belongs to me.
And if that's the case, then why would she have joined the Fatui Harbingers to begin with, if they're sent there to retrieve her? We know she was at the funeral of La Senora, so what happened between the funeral and now, that they need to go and retrieve her? It seems that she's going to be caught in the middle of this, the locals worshipping her but her technically being a Fatui Harbinger. Perhaps like Scaramouche, Iltadore and the other Fatui members were able to sedate her and manipulate her. Because she is clearly closely connected to the moons in Celestia, maybe they needed her for that exact reason. And Sandrone making it very clear, stay out of their way or die in the process, because she's not going to back down. So overall, I think the main focus of 6.0 is going to be the Fatui versus the Frost Moon Scions and see how that develops. Is it possible that Sandrone will be playable? Yeah, it's very likely, but it's also likely not, since she'll be the main villain of Nod-Krai. Columbina will be playable pretty well, almost 100%. She has a Statue of the Seven. She'll be like the Archon banner of this phase, because there is no Archon in Nod-Krai. She is the closest thing we have to an Archon. And like I said, her being an Anemo element checks out with the tragic story that comes with that vision, if they are the kids from the Nars and Croins. But, and I'll be completely honest with you, I'd be stoked if she was Anemo. That's my favorite playable element. But it's weird that she would be Anemo in my opinion if she's playable, because it's a mech. She's obviously a mech and he's a mech. Regardless of our speculation for Sandrone's origins, wouldn't it make sense for this mech to be Electro? We don't have a playable Electro Fatui Harbinger yet. This is the perfect opportunity, so despite me not minding at all its Anemo, it seems a bit odd of a choice to me. Since the Wanderer's already a playable Fatui Harbinger, we have Hydro, we have Pyro, this would be the best time to have an Electro Fatui Harbinger. And Columbina is heavily hinted and speculated to be Hydro, especially since the moons and the ocean and water have a huge connection too. Overall, I'm very excited for Nod-Krai. There is so many intriguing characters. Like Sandrone might have been overshadowed a little bit because, we're getting Varka, the Higson Circle, Alice, Columbina, new Nod-Krai characters that all look amazing, so you can get easily overwhelmed by the amount of really great characters and content we're about to get. But make no mistake, Sandrone is going to be a phenomenal Fatui Harbinger. So much mystique and intrigue with this Harbinger. She might just be the 7th ranked, but like Iltadore, she's going to be a very methodical Harbinger, not like the captain that's upfront and honorable. And I honestly think Sandrone is capable of doing some incredibly evil acts to get what she wants. And because she seems very loyal to the Fatui cause, that's just gonna make for a great villain that's actually motivated to fight for the Fatui. Since in Natlan the captain was kind of a good character and the Fatui actually helped, this time they're actually going to be going back to being the villains. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Sandrone is Alain. He would have already a ton of experience working with the Abyss, so might even be able to use the Wild Hunt to his advantage. But that's all I have on Sandrone right now. Thank God we won't have to wait much longer to actually see this all play out. I also want to recap and talk about the Doctor and Scaramouche's relationship because they're going to have an epic confrontation in Nod-Krai, or at the very least that's what they're foreshadowing to us. Scaramouche saying he has some unfinished business.
No rush, and I'd like to catch up with an old friend first. And you, young man?
Let's part ways here. I have an old score of my own to settle.
So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.